a celebration of love between two souls united in the holy bond of marriage. It was a day to be joyful. As family and friends came to celebrate the marriage of Amir Calloway, a man renowned for his success, honesty, and abiding love for his fiancée, Zariah Monroe, the atmosphere was one of warmth and laughter. She was a picture of beauty, standing by his side, appearing the ideal fit for a couple that everyone knew and loved. The scene was idyllic, a representation of joy and community. African-American customs and culture enhanced the ceremony, giving the day additional depth and importance. Many people would recall the wedding as the pinnacle of elegance and joy. But beneath the happy exterior and the smiles, beneath the surface of this seemingly ideal union, was a dark truth. The guests who applauded for Amir and Zariah's future were unaware that a storm was building that would make this joyous occasion into a tragic evening. Not everything is as it seems, and the joy that characterized this day would quickly disintegrate, exposing secrets that might shatter the very pillars of love and trust. The flawless facade started to crumble as the evening went on, revealing the actual nature of this union and its unanticipated repercussions. Greetings from Unseen True Crime Stories HQ. I would like to express my gratitude to my viewers and subscribers in particular for their support as we continue to improve and provide daily told and untold true crime stories. Remember to subscribe to this channel, please. Her story starts in a small neighborhood where fantasies of luxury and safety seemed like far-fetched dreams, rather than with the glistening chandeliers of a lavish wedding. Zariah Monroe had a keen awareness of the injustices in the world, the hardships of surviving, and the harsh truth that love by itself could not satisfy hunger or provide a roof over one's head from an early age. These early experiences shaped her goals, giving her a strong desire to escape the limitations of her background and start a life free from financial concerns. Every move she made, including the disastrous one to follow Amir Calloway, a guy who, in many ways, embodied everything she had ever desired, was motivated by her desire for a better life. A guy who would protect her from life's uncertainties because of his success and stability. When Zariah met Amir, it wasn't love at first sight, but rather a calculated awareness of what he might provide. He was established, respected, and affluent, the type of guy who could offer her with a life she had always dreamt of. And so, Zariah set her eyes on him, knowing that with the proper moves, she might ensure a future that was as pleasant as it was lucrative. Their meeting appeared almost fortuitous, a random contact that swiftly bloomed into a romance. But for Zariah, it was never simply about the appeal, albeit Amir was a lovely guy with a pleasant smile and a kind manner. It was about what he represented, a ticket out of the life she had always known into a world of wealth and comfort. She saw in Amir not only a companion, but a provider, someone who could provide her stability in a manner that no one else could. As their friendship grew, Zariah performed her part to perfection. She understood just how to present herself, how to say the proper things, and how to be the woman Amir wanted her to be. She was attentive, sympathetic, and always appeared to understand him in a way that no one else could. To Amir, Zariah was everything he had ever wanted in a partner: gorgeous, supportive, and apparently as in love with him as he was with her. But behind the surface, Zariah was constantly calculating, always ensuring that every action she made got her closer to securing the life she had always dreamt of. But then there was Khalil Calloway, a guy of a different type, less grounded, more free-spirited. Khalil was still making his place in the world, his life not yet characterized by the same success that distinguished his elder brother, Amir. He was fascinating in his own way, with a sort of youthful vitality that made him alluring particularly to women. However, Khalil lacked the stability and money that Zariah so much desired, in contrast to Amir. The planned rendezvous with Amir was nothing like their first meeting. It was an impromptu, electrifying accidental encounter that swiftly evolved into something more. Instead of seeing Khalil as a potential future partner, Zariah saw him as a diversion, a means of indulging in an exciting but prohibited activity. The reason Khalil was so alluring was because he was the complete antithesis of everything she had in mind for her life. Knowing that their relationship could never be more than a covert one gave them a feeling of freedom and danger. But as time passed, it got more difficult to maintain that secret, and it grew more difficult to distinguish between manipulation and love. Innocently enough, their affair started with a kiss that was stolen and a chat that was whispered in the shadows of rooms where no one could see them. However, what began as a brief error of judgment swiftly escalated into something much more serious. Each rendezvous was a test of how far they could push the limits without being discovered, and the excitement of their covert gatherings grew addicting. The encounter was an emotional roller coaster for Khalil. He was completely enamored with a lady who appeared to have a unique understanding of him. Zoraya, however, had to strike a balance. She was aware that this relationship would never work out and that it would jeopardize all of her goals with Amir. She was unable to let go. However, she needed Khalil for the power it gave her as much as the physical connection. It was a strategy to maintain control over both brothers and keep them in her sphere of influence while she planned for the future. Zoraya felt in charge of the affair, since it provided a means of keeping Khalil caught in her web and guaranteeing that he would never tell the truth. She kept him near by using all of her resources, her charm, her humor, and even her vulnerability to ensure that he felt guilty enough to remain quiet, but not so much that he would leave. Every encounter turned into a well-planned dance in which she was in complete control. Zoraya's preparations started to take form as the wedding day drew near. The fact that she was pregnant might have easily caused everything to fall apart. However, she took advantage of it instead. She made sure Amir thought the kid she carried was his, even if it wasn't. She strengthened his conviction that this kid was the fruition of their love and the beginning of their family with every day that went by. Amir was thrilled at the idea of being a parent and was totally oblivious to the lie. As he anticipated the life they would soon create together, his love for Zoraya only became stronger. He never once questioned her tale since he was so devoted to her and ignorant to the warning indicators. She had a rush of fulfillment each time Zoraya touched her expanding tummy, knowing that her plan was succeeding flawlessly. Amir was so engrossed in his love and enthusiasm that he failed to detect the gaps in the facade, such as when Zoraya seemed preoccupied or her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. He was already seeing the life they would create as a family and the future of the kid they would raise together. Amir saw the wedding as more than simply a formality. It was the start of a new chapter in his life, one that he felt was based on trust and love. He had no idea that it was based on false information. Tensions started to rise as the wedding day approached. Khalil's determination to remain quiet was eroded by his guilt. He was aware that there would be no turning back once the rings were on their fingers and the vows were exchanged. A ticking time bomb that might blow everything up would make the secret he held much more perilous. Zoraya's resolve, however, just became stronger. Now that she was so close to obtaining the life she had always desired, she couldn't afford to let anything slide. She kept playing her role flawlessly while making sure Khalil remained in line and under control. But she was starting to feel the consequences of her deceit. The stress of maintaining the facade was beginning to manifest itself in subtle, almost undetectable ways. Unspoken anxiety that foreshadowed the impending storm pervaded the air as the wedding day approached. Amir, Khalil, and Zoraya were all speeding toward a collision that would permanently alter their lives. The components were in position, and the stage was prepared. The only thing left to do was wait for the inevitable to happen. It was supposed to be the happiest day of Amir's life, and the wedding morning arrived clear and bright. As guests started to arrive, the excitement and laughter filled the air, and their faces lit up with the delight of the occasion. However, one guy stood out in this sea of joy. Khalil, the younger brother of the groom, whose heart was burdened by a secret that threatened to ruin everything. Khalil felt the weight of his own guilt weighing down on him, choking him with its intensity as he watched his elder brother, glowing with love and eagerness. Knowing that the kid Zoraya carried was his, he couldn't help but feel remorse and jealousy. yet here she was, marrying his own brother. He was reminded of the life he could never claim as his own by every grin and hug between Amir and Zariah, which was like a knife to his heart. He made an effort to ignore the thoughts and concentrate on the festivities, but the more he tried to control his feelings, the more they gnawed at him and demanded recognition. Khalil became more uneasy as the ceremony went on. A bitter reminder of the deceit that had led them to this point, the vows, the ring exchange, and the kiss that cemented their marriage all seemed like cruel jokes. He acted as the encouraging sibling while standing next to his brother, but on the inside, he was a whirlpool of contradictory feelings. How could he watch as his own brother, without realizing it, entrusted his child's upbringing to another man? Anger, grief, and helplessness twisted within him as the notion tore at him. Unaware of the chaos within Khalil, the visitors rejoiced and praised their happiness, which stood in sharp contrast to the gloom that had taken root in his heart. Every laugh seemed hollow, every congratulation a reminder of the life he would never have, despite his best efforts to grin and take part in the celebrations. Khalil had a twinge of hopelessness as Amir and Zariah went hand in hand down the aisle, knowing that every step they took would bring them closer to a future based on falsehoods and further from the truth. Amir, meantime, was blissfully oblivious to the maelstrom that was building under the surface. His heart was joyful, full of love and anticipation for what was ahead for him and his new spouse. With a grin that appeared to radiate from his soul, he glided through the throng with ease. For him, this was the day he had been looking forward to, the time when everything finally came together, the culmination of all his ambitions and aspirations. With sincere sincerity, he welcomed the visitors and expressed gratitude for joining him on this momentous occasion. His love for Zariah was evident in every embrace and handshake, which confirmed the joy radiating from him. He often glanced at her, the promise of a lifetime together shining in his tender eyes. There was no place for mistrust or doubt in his thoughts. He was excited to begin the next phase of their life, had entire faith in her, and had faith in the future they were creating together. Amir was unaware of the black cloud hanging over his brother as he proceeded to bask in the happiness of the day. He was unable to see Khalil's tense stance, his forced grin, or the way his eyes lingered on Zariah with a mixture of grief and love. Amir's joy was so intense and pervasive that it prevented him from seeing the indications of discontent in people around him. The chaos that simmered just below the surface did not disturb his wonderful day. Amir's happiness and Khalil's mounting hopelessness stood in striking contrast, serving as a subtle but potent reminder of the falsehoods that had led them to this point. Khalil was plunging farther into a pit of agony, the weight of his secret threatening to drag him down, while Amir was floating on a cloud of ecstasy. But for the time being, Amir was oblivious to the impending storm and was unaffected by the gloom, his heart full and his future bright. The mastermind behind this intricate dance of deceit was Zariah, the bride. She seemed to be the epitome of tranquility, with a placid expression as she carried herself with poise and elegance throughout the day. With every smile and every phrase meticulously timed to create the appearance of perfection, she performed her job brilliantly. Behind her calm facade, however, Zariah was acutely aware of the strain that simmered beneath the surface, the tumult that, if not properly handled, threatened to topple everything. She kept weaving her web throughout the day, gently controlling both guys to keep them in line. It was simple with Amir. A mere touch or comforting smile was enough to make him happy since he was so enamored with her and so blinded by his faith in her. She was well aware of how to behave and speak to allay his concerns and support the deception that united them. She felt a rush of joy every time he gazed at her with those loving eyes, knowing that her plan was succeeding flawlessly. Khalil, however, was another matter. His emotions were roiling just under the surface, ready to explode at any minute, and she could see the anguish in his eyes. He was agitated and having trouble accepting the truth of what was occurring, and she realized she needed to keep him composed so he wouldn't do something that would destroy all she had put so much effort into creating. She kept him under control by using every weapon in her toolbox, including her charm, empathy, and capacity to make him feel both guilty and obligated. As the day went on, Zariah managed to talk to Khalil and draw him aside, seeming to be concerned, but really doing so to make sure he kept in line. She warned him that telling the truth would have dire repercussions for both Amir and the kid they were now responsible for protecting. She used his feelings and his love for their unborn kid as leverage to silence him. She kept assuring him that everything would be okay and that they could still work things out if he trusted her and did as she said. Zariah's serene facade concealed the turmoil that was simmering inside her. She was aware that if she made one mistake, everything may fall apart. But at whatever cost, she was resolved to finish it in order to guarantee the life she had always imagined. She used a subtle but efficient balancing act between control and certainty to keep both guys precisely where she wanted them. As the storm clouds collected on the horizon, waiting for the proper opportunity to unleash their wrath, the day continued to preserve its flawless appearance. They had hoped for an evening filled with joy, laughing, and future toasts, and the reception had fulfilled all of their expectations. The remains of what had been a wonderful day were left behind as the visitors, now full of food, drink, and fun, started to go. Zariah's vitality began to decline as the night went on, and she could feel the pressure of the day's events mounting on her. She had performed her role well, maintaining the appearance of a joyful, loving bride. But now that the guests had left and the lights had gone down, she could feel the fatigue seeping into her bones. Unaware of the impending storm, she excused herself from the celebrations, leaving Amir to greet the last visitors with a grin that was as radiant as ever. With her mind racing with anticipation of what was ahead, Zariah walked back to the hotel, her feet heavy. She was afraid of what Khalil would do since she knew that he was having difficulties and that the events of the day had driven him to the limit. However, she was too exhausted to think straight and too depleted to be ready for the impending encounter. She just wanted to go away and have a little serenity before the consequences of her decisions hit her hard. However, she could sense the tension in the air, a tangible sensation of dread that made her pulse beat, even as she moved through the hotel's silent hallways. With a sigh of relief, she walked inside the room and shut the door. For a while, the quiet was a welcome diversion from the day's turmoil. She went slowly as her mind raced with ideas of how to deal with Khalil and prevent things from falling apart. She anticipated his arrival. With everything that was on the line, he couldn't avoid it. Even though she was terrified of the encounter, she knew it was inevitable. Pretending and concealing were no longer an option. She needed to be prepared since the truth was about to be revealed. With his heart thumping in his chest, Khalil stayed in the reception, watching Zariah go with his gaze. Every part of the evening had been a reminder of the deception he was leading and the secret he was concealing from the brother who had the greatest amount of faith in him. He had made an effort to control his emotions and keep his composure, but as the night went on, the weight of his guilt became too much to bear. He felt a wave of rage and sadness as he saw Amir still happy and enjoying the sunshine of his ideal day. When his own kid was going to be raised by a different man, how could he keep watching and watching while his brother was duped? He made the choice with a sudden burst of resolution that pushed him forward. He was unable to remain silent any longer. To find out what would happen to his kid, he had to meet Zariah and demand answers. His mind was racing with ideas and feelings as his legs moved by themselves, moving him from the reception area to the hotel. How would he respond? How would he start? His mind was racing with questions, but he was unable to find the answers. All he knew was that he needed to confront her and the truth about what they had done. The usual knot of dread wrenched in his gut as he got closer to the motel. This was the time that would make all the difference. As he moved nearer the chamber, he could sense the tension in the air and the stifling stillness that pervaded the passageways. His heart pounded harder with each step, which seemed to take forever. His hands trembled under the weight of the understanding that he was about to break the illusion that had kept them all together. But now there was no going back. Just ahead was the door and the confrontation that has been brewing ever since this deceit started. Khalil arrived at the door, paused, and held his hand just above the surface. He could feel the excitement pumping through his veins and his pulse thumping in his chest. He briefly contemplated turning around and leaving the disaster they had made. However, his determination was strengthened by the idea of his kid and the life that would be spent without him. He inhaled deeply before knocking. Zariah cringed inside the room at the noise. Even before she answered the door, she recognized the person. She twisted the handle with a shaking hand and yanked the door open, discovering Khalil standing there with a mixture of terror and resolve in his eyes. She moved out of the way without saying anything, letting him in. With a gentle click, the door shut behind him, cutting them off from the outside world. For a minute, Khalil remained there, the tension in their silence palpable. Then the words poured out as if the dam had broken. "How will we proceed?" Even though Khalil's voice was strained just above a whisper, it was clear how intense it was. He had wild eyes that reflected the anguish in his heart with a desperate look. "What will become of our child?" Zariah let out a sigh and lowered her shoulders, struggling to find the courage to confront him. "We've been through this before, Khalil," she said in a tone that was almost too serene. "I married Amir so that he could provide me and my kid a stable existence. Nothing could be changed at this time." However, her words didn't calm him down. Rather, they stoked the rage that had been building inside of him all night. "Consistency?" He stepped closer and spit, raising his voice. "Do you mean that you'll let my brother raise my kid and expect me to do nothing except observe?" "Zariah, how can you ask me that?" As the dispute intensified and their voices became louder and hotter with each exchange, the room shook with tension. Khalil was furious because his devotion to his brother and his love for his child were at odds. He wanted to be there for his child and protect them, but Zariah had put him in a precarious situation from which he felt helpless. The idea of another man, even his own brother, taking his place in his child's life was too much for him to handle. For her part, Zariah made an effort to remain calm, but the stress was starting to show. "Do you believe I can handle this easily?" she retorted, her voice trembling with passion. "In order to provide this kid with a future, I'm doing everything it takes to live. Do you not realize that? Khalil, we have to live with them now that we have made our decisions." Khalil wasn't paying attention, however. He was on the verge of losing control of his rage. "How about me? How about our kid? Do you not care about us?" His voice broke, the anguish in his voice piercing the atmosphere like a blade. He was frantic, asking with her to see his side to find a way out of this problem they had made. But Zariah's determination was solid. She was too far gone to let it all go at this point. She said, "It's too late," her voice barely heard over Khalil's ragged breathing. "We are unable to return." The weight of her words hung over them like a veil, and the room fell into a tight quiet. Khalil's emotions were a frenzied whirl of dread, despair, and rage as his thoughts raced. Instead of finding the answers or a solution he had hoped for, he was left with just more questions and uncertainties. The truth of their predicament pressed down on him with a stifling intensity, and he felt the walls closing in. He had gained a greater feeling of powerlessness from the encounter, but neither comfort or resolve. Then, while they were having a fierce argument, Amir came into the room. He had gone upstairs after saying goodbye to the last of the guests, excited to see his wife again and enjoy the first peaceful moments of their marriage. His head was full of ideas about the future they would create together, and he continued to grin as he made his way down the corridor toward the door. However, as he got closer to the door, he heard a furious discussion coming from the inside and shouted voices that stopped him cold. His hand was millimeters from the door when he froze. The tone was clear, even if the words were muted. Tension, rage, and despair were all present. He tried to listen while his heart pounded in his chest, and a chilling fear crept over him. He knew Khalil's voice, which was tinged with anguish and wrath, and Zariah's, which was a combination of despair and exasperation. The knowledge that something was really amiss weighed heavily on him. However, he was immobile and couldn't bring himself to interrupt. Instead, He tried to understand what he was hearing by pressing his ear to the door. As the internal discussion went on, Amir's world gradually started to fall apart. Each of the words he heard pierced more into the fabric of a life he believed to be his, like daggers. He heard Khalil clamoring for information about his kid, whom Amir had thought was his own. He overheard Zariah acknowledge that she had married him not out of love, but rather for security and the life he could provide. In those few, excruciating seconds, the truth was revealed to him, the entire scope of the treachery becoming clearer with each utterance. The weight of the truth weighed heavily on Amir, who stood there shattered and breathing in short, ragged breaths. His head was spinning with the ramifications of what he had just heard, and his legs felt like they may collapse under him. Together, the brother he had trusted and the woman he loved had plotted, deceived him, and destroyed the basis of his existence. The future he had dreamt of was a horrible delusion, and he had been tricked in the most terrible manner imaginable. He stayed there, stuck to the place, while the internal struggle went on, with each statement, accusation, and request for understanding piercing him like a dagger and intensifying the suffering. He couldn't face them yet, couldn't force himself to interrupt. Before facing the people he had loved the most, he needed to collect his courage and comprehend the magnitude of the betrayal. After what seemed like a lifetime, Amir's determination finally solidified. He was aware that he could no longer dodge the conflict. He inhaled deeply, regained his balance, held up his hand, and rapped on the door. The knock pierced the tense conversation between Zariah and Khalil and reverberated across the room. Realizing they had been overheard, they both became quiet inside as the situation's reality hit them. The gentle but strong tap indicated that the time for reckoning had come. With his heart thumping in his chest, Khalil and Zariah looked at one another. Neither of them was ready for the destruction they had caused, even though they both knew what was coming. Khalil approached the door slowly, his fingers shaking as he twisted the latch and yanked it open. Amir stood there with a mask of destruction on his face as the door slammed wide. When his eyes locked with Khalil's, the once strong fraternity was irreparably broken. The deep, excruciating wound that had been inflicted upon Amir was clearly reflected in the agony in his eyes. What had been damaged could not be repaired by words or explanations. The ramifications were irrevocable once the truth was out. The whole weight of the treachery fell on Amir as soon as he entered the room, and a thick, oppressive quiet descended over the space. Zariah and Khalil's initial argument had now ensnared Amir as well, drawing him into the whirlpool of treachery and hopelessness. Something inside of him broke, a deep, painful fracture that would never completely mend as the revelation struck him again, this time with even more power. He was shattered by the brother he had trusted and the woman he loved. He realized that nothing would ever be the same as he stood there, the gravity of their treachery sweeping over him. The whole weight of the treachery weighed down on Amir like a smothering blanket as he stood in the room, his entire life crumbling around him. A tornado of emotions, including blinding anger, crushing grief, and a deep feeling of loss, took the place of the love and trust he had formerly felt for Zariah and Khalil. His heart felt like a heavy, broken stone in his chest, where it had once been full of joy and hope. He saw his brother and wife, the two people he had trusted most, for what they really were, traitors who had destroyed the life he had dreamed of. The truth of their duplicity was too much to him, and he could feel his mental fissures growing until they threatened to shatter. How could they harm him like this? How could they destroy all that was important to him? Amir's thoughts were racing as he tried to comprehend the mayhem that had been let loose. All of the time he spent with Zariah, all of his promises, all of his hopes for their future, all of it was a terrible joke that was perpetrated on him. His greatest suffering was now brought on by the love that had previously characterized his life, and he was unable to break free from the crushing hold of hopelessness that had tightened around his heart. Amir's voice trembled with a combination of sadness and rage as he turned towards Zariah and Khalil, driven by the strength of his emotions. "How could you harm me like this?" Anger burning in his eyes, he asked. "How could both of you have betrayed me in this way? I cherished you. I had faith in both of you. His words, each tinged with the suffering of a man whose life had been ripped apart, lingered in the air like a death sentence. Zariah and Khalil stood before him, their own remorse and humiliation visible in their eyes, yet there were no words that could restore the harm they had inflicted. As Amir's emotions burst in a flood of anger and grief, the room seemed to contract around them, with the walls closing in. With his voice breaking under the strain of his sorrow, Amir yelled at Khalil, "You were my brother. What kind of betrayal might you have? How could you lie to me every day while still ignoring me?" Then he turned to look at Zariah, the lady he had thought was his soulmate. "And you, how could you fool me like this? How could you convince me that this was our future, our child? You've ruined everything." The emotions were too strong to control, and the encounter was unfiltered. Amir's eyes began to well up with tears as he tried to understand the extent of the betrayal. His words were loaded with the pain of a man who has lost everything, his heart exploding with every breath. The air was heavy with the unspoken reality that nothing would ever be the same again, and the tension in the room was intolerable. As the confrontation took on a life of its own, the tension in the room reached a breaking point and the emotions began to spiral out of control. Amidst the confusion, an unanticipated incident transpired, resulting in a tragic and irrevocable moment that would permanently change the lives of all those involved. Amir made a snap decision that would have disastrous results because he was so overcome by his grief and rage. Amir threw himself at Khalil in a fury, his feelings pushing him over the edge into insanity. The sounds of their struggle reverberated through the walls as the room descended into chaos. In an instant, an accident occurred, a moment of unimaginable tragedy that no one could have foreseen. In a split second, Khalil's life was gone, and he collapsed to the ground. As she ran to Khalil's side, Zariah let out a shriek that rang through the air, but it was too late. There was no going back once the damage was done. As the truth of what he had done started to set in, Amir stood motionless, his mind spinning. The tragedy weighed down on them like a crushing force, and the room fell into a suffocating silence. Their actions had sealed their dooms, transforming what had been a day of celebration into a night of horror. Zariah's sobs, as she held Khalil's lifeless body, were the only sound to break the eerie silence that followed the tragedy. Amir stood there, his thoughts numb, his heart crushed beyond repair. The ramifications of their falsehoods and betrayals had led to this an irreparable event that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The lives that had once been interwoven by love and trust were now permanently split apart, each one etched by the wounds of that tragic night. The space, once filled with the promise of a fresh beginning, was now a mausoleum of shattered hopes and broken lives. Amir, Zariah, and Khalil have all paid the price for their secrets, their betrayals, and their deceptions. There was no redemption, no turning back. The effect of that night would resound through their lives forever, a continual reminder of the deadly power of falsehoods and the fragility of trust. As the film comes to a conclusion, we are left to ponder on the events that happened, the decisions that were made, the secrets that were hidden, and the lives that were lost as a consequence. Amir, Zariah, and Khalil's narrative serves as a sobering reminder of the terrible repercussions that may result from treachery and the destructive force of betrayal. What is the cost of deception? How far can a deception go before it unravels, pulling everything down with it? These are the questions that remain in the aftermath of this catastrophe that push us to face the darkest parts of our nature. The decisions we make, the secrets we hold, each one has a weight, a capacity to affect the trajectory of our lives and the lives of people we love. In the end, we are left to explore the moral ramifications of their acts and weigh the heavy toll that treachery and falsehoods may take on our souls. Trust is a delicate thing, and once destroyed, it can never completely be repaired. Amir, Zariah, and Khalil's narrative serves as a warning about love, treachery, and the terrible consequences of harboring secrets for too long. I appreciate you watching. For more material that examines the intricacies of interpersonal relationships, the moral quandaries we encounter, and the tales that speak to us all. Please subscribe to this channel if you like this story.